This was in October of 2022. I lived alone in a little home inside a small family-type neighborhood. I'd been there since 2015, and I saw the fall-off of Halloween firsthand. Basically, after 2020, nobody celebrated. None of the homes really put up any decorations, and none of the kids were interested in dressing up and going door to door for candy, which up until then was always a big thing that everyone did every year. The last 2 years, my neighborhood was just quiet and empty on Halloween night, so I really assumed this year would be all the same. On the morning of Halloween, I made coffee and went to sit out on the front porch to look at all the fall-colored trees. But as soon as I opened the door, there were these 2 kids in my front yard, maybe 30 feet away, standing where all the trees were. And I say kids, but I really couldn't tell for sure. I only assumed because they were wearing Halloween masks. They were on the taller side though, and skinny, most likely high schoolers, if not adults. They were too far to get any sort of good look, and basically the instant I opened the door, both of them froze for a second, then hurriedly walked further into the trees and away from my home. It could not have looked more suspicious, the way they hurried off. It was the exact reaction you'd get from catching kids doing something that they shouldn't have been. And even though it was Halloween, I'd never seen anyone just wander around in masks in the morning. Honestly, I thought it was just some kids being stupid. I mean, with the holiday and everything. At least they walked away once they saw me, so I didn't feel like I had to worry. I sat outside and enjoyed the decent fall weather while I had my coffee for the morning. The rest of that day was really the same as any other day, up until 4 o'clock. This was about when trick-or-treaters would start walking around, although, like I said, I hadn't seen any in years. Still, I'm not too sure why, but I'd get a small bag of candy and have it ready in case a few kids did come around. I guess it was just the tradition of it that I was holding on to. I sat on the sofa in the living room and turned on whatever channel I could find that was playing all the typical Halloween shows and movies. I also left the curtains open by the front windows so I could see outside if any kids were walking around. Over the next couple hours, I saw nothing more than a few cars driving down the street. No kids or anything walking around. And after a while, the sun went down and the whole street was just dark and lifeless. Even after all these years, it still felt weird seeing that on Halloween. I stayed in the living room and continued to watch TV. Around 8 though, a knock sounded at the front door. It made me jump up from the couch. I didn't see anyone outside the windows walking up to my house. And even if it were a few lone trick-or-treaters, I thought it was a bit late for anyone to still be out. I brought the bowl of candy over anyway, and opened the door. I felt a small shiver run through me when I saw it was the same 2 kids I'd seen earlier. Again, they had masks on, and full black clothing, so kids was just my guess. But up close, they were definitely a lot taller than what I'd expect from anyone still trick-or-treating. And I quickly noticed they didn't even have bags or anything to carry any candy with. The 2 of them just stood there. Couldn't even see either of their eyes through the masks, so it made it really strange for me. I still tried to smile and asked if they wanted candy, holding out the bowl. Neither of them spoke. And after just a couple seconds of waiting, I just closed the door, completely weirded out. But even after that second encounter with them, I still thought this was just some stupid Halloween joke that they were pulling on me, probably trying to scare me just to mess with me. I waited a minute, then looked out the door again, and the 2 were gone, which for some reason confirmed to me that this was some stupid prank that I didn't need to overthink. I went back to the couch, watching TV well into the night. Don't think I got up until 1 or 2 a.m. to go to bed. I shut everything off and headed upstairs. By this point, the two kids hadn't crossed my mind in hours. I hopped in bed and felt myself falling asleep within seconds, but was suddenly shot back awake by a knock echoing through the house. I quickly got up and opened the bedroom door. They knocked again, right at the front door, the sound resonating through all the quiet rooms and hallways of my home. I quietly walked downstairs, trying to see who it was. I was genuinely terrified, even though I was sure it was the same kids, because at this point, it was way more than just some harmless prank. This was stalking, or harassment, at the very least. I went up to the door and looked out. There was only one of them. He stood there, mask over his face, right up to the door, still knocking repeatedly. But it was just him, and that sort of freaked me out. Where the hell was the other? I backed away from the door, trying to get myself to think straight. And then I heard a soft creak behind me. A door swaying open in the hallway. I shifted my body around. There was a shadowy figure at the end of the hall, and the moment I looked at him, he began barreling toward me, knife in hand. I sprinted up the stairs and into my bedroom, locking it and moving everything I could in front of it. I started calling the police while trying to think of what to do next. Outside the door, I could hear the muffled sound of the two guys talking back and forth. Couldn't tell what they were saying, but I think they were also debating what to do. And after 30 seconds, their footsteps moved back downstairs and out of the house. A few officers came over and did an investigation, but they didn't find much to go off of. We all agree, though, that one of them knocking at the front door was a distraction, so the other could find a way in and jump me. Why they targeted me is the biggest uncertainty, though, and it still has me terrified. A lot of people I talk to think it was a couple of deranged teens, or even young adults, that had some sick plan in mind to do on Halloween night. That would explain all of it happening to me for no real reason, but I don't think I'll ever get to know for sure. Behind my neighborhood is a decent-sized forest with plenty of trails for hiking and camping. I frequented a lot of them, but often found I enjoyed the experience way better when nobody else was around. I avoided all the major campgrounds and preferred to tent camp along some of the backpacking trails. I did this camping trip sometime near the end of autumn, as I remember all the trees were leafless, and it was starting to get colder outside with each passing day. I thought I'd be fine for at least 1 or 2 more trips before winter, though. I set out on a hike at midday. No cars or people were anywhere near the trailhead, and along the 8-mile hike, I didn't see anyone at all. I think most people were probably done for the hiking and camping season. It was quite a bit colder than I expected, but I came prepared with heavy jackets and a -20-degree sleeping bag, which was more than enough for what I was doing. Eventually, I came across an open spot that looked like a nice place to set up for the night. It was just a bit off the beaten trail, and I'm pretty sure I'd actually camped there once or twice before, so I felt comfortable as I got my tent up, built a small fire ring, and got a campfire going. I made a hot cup of decaf to help me warm up as I sat right next to the fire. With the sun going down, it started to get colder and colder. There was a bit of a breeze too, throwing cold wind in my face, and honestly making the experience more miserable than I was hoping for. And there was something else. I kept seeing something in the distance, like way out in the trees. It was far enough to blend in with everything, all the dry branches and bushes, so I didn't know what it was. But it was like whatever or whoever it was was staying perfectly far enough to keep me from seeing them. Only their movement between all the trees was visible, and with the sun getting lower and lower, it only made me feel more uneasy. The feeling that I was being stalked was creeping into my head, but I tried to shut it down. I didn't want to believe that that was even a possibility. I really hoped it wasn't even a person at all, and was just a deer or harmless animal roaming around its territory. An hour after sundown, and with night overhead, the uneasy feeling, mixed with the chilling cold winds, made me really uncomfortable. I thought maybe fixing one of those problems would help, so I moved into the tent and inside my sleeping bag to warm up. I left the opening unzipped, with the flap tied to the top so I could still get a little bit of warmth from the campfire, and watch the flames as I laid inside. It definitely helped me stay warm, but only being able to see what was directly in front of me wasn't all that great. Plus, beyond maybe 10 feet of the campfire, it was just complete blackout. I want to say too that I'd been camping for years, so this feeling of being alone in the woods at night wasn't unfamiliar, and yet this was the only time I'd ever felt this way. Everyone always says when you get a bad sense or feel something is off, you should just pack up and leave without questioning it. I was naive enough to think I'd never get that feeling, and even worse, I was stupid not to listen to it. I stayed in the tent, curled up in my sleeping bag and watching the fire. A good 2 or 3 hours went by. Nothing really changed, except it got colder. But as I laid there, I started to hear what sounded like cracking footsteps across the woods. It was coming from behind my tent, the one area I couldn't see at all. I wanted to get up and look, but I sort of froze up, the panic setting in as I let my mind try to think of every possible way that what I was hearing was something other than what it was. The footsteps crept closer and closer, getting maybe 5 to 10 feet away from the back of the tent, before it suddenly went quiet. The crunching stopped, and the sounds of the campfire and wind blowing through the woods filled the void. My heart was pounding in my chest. Embarrassingly, I think I stayed frozen in place for a whole minute before the pain and anxiety of knowing someone was right behind my tent became too much to bear. In one swift motion, I unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight, and jumped out of the tent, shining the light directly at the woods behind me. Nothing. No one was there. Somehow, this actually made me panic even more. I never heard any footsteps walking away, so honestly, a part of me thought I was going crazy. I must have stood there swiveling around and shining the flashlight in every direction for 15 minutes, listening to every sound the woods made, and being completely indecisive about what to do. Whether to pack and try to run out of the forest in the dark, or camp it out and just keep watch. I was freezing though, and the fire was running low on fuel. After a while, I decided to pack. Wasn't sure yet if I'd leave or stay around the campsite, but packing seemed like a good idea either way. As soon as I began taking down my tent, a flurry of footsteps moved from the dark area just behind it. I thought I might have seen a bit of them running away too, but with the flickering campfire casting shadows on everything, I couldn't say for sure. I quickly packed up, stopping every few seconds to look around. I was completely paranoid. After a few minutes, I managed to get everything stuffed into my bag. I tossed it over my shoulders, and before I could stomp out the fire, a man appeared across from me. He walked up quickly, approaching the light. He was on the taller and larger side, with some torn up jeans and a dirty fleece jacket, and a black beanie on his head. He looked around 40 and had heavy, distant eyes. "Leaving so late?" Way too cold to be running out into the dark like that. He spoke in a gravelly, firm voice. I didn't even respond, taking a few steps back. The man looked like he was trying to figure out how to keep me there. But once I started to get further away, I could see in his face that he realized he wasn't in control. His eyes grew into this unsettling stare. I turned and just started running, straight into the trees. Could barely see where I was going, but I could hear the man's footsteps coming up behind me. After about 30 seconds though, I'd either run too far for him to follow, or he just stopped chasing. I still ran for 15 more minutes, just to be safe and get as much distance as possible. But then I was lost. It was pitch black, and there was no way for me to know which way would take me back to the trail. And even if I went the right way, I'd probably not be able to see the trail in the dark. So I sat up against a tree in the middle of the darkness and just waited. Hours passed as I sat there shivering. The whole forest was silent and still pitch black. I swear though, a couple of times I heard something moving in the distance, out in the trees, like the guy was walking around looking for me still. I just remained quiet and waited for the sun to come up, allowing me to see where I was and make my way back. I made it out unharmed, which I honestly think is a miracle. I think that guy had some really nasty intentions that I narrowly escaped from. He'd likely been stalking me all night, waiting for a moment to do something. Why it all unfolded the way it did, I don't know. Last fall, my sister went on a trip over Halloween weekend. It was for some sort of party she was going to, but she was flying there, so taking her dog Milo wasn't really that convenient. She'd be gone for only a couple days though, and I offered to watch Milo while she was away. The apartment I lived in didn't allow pets, so rather than bringing Milo to my place, I just stayed at her house for the weekend. I packed my work laptop and some other random things I might need, then headed 30 minutes down to the house in the morning. Just an hour after arriving, my sister left for her trip. Now, Milo was a really easy dog to look after. I'd done this a bunch of times before. He was super sweet and wasn't all that loud either, despite being a German Shepherd. He was getting older, so most of the time he just hung out in whatever room I was in and relaxed while I worked. So I set my laptop up in one of the spare bedrooms and started my workday. Milo laid in his doggy bed right next to my desk, just out of the corner of my view. There wasn't much going on for several hours, aside from me working. But oddly, throughout the day, he kept perking his head up. Usually I'd assume it was just a dog being a dog, hearing something small that was really nothing. But this was different. He was sure he'd actually heard something, because he wouldn't just go right back to sleep. Milo's head would raise and his ears would perk up, and he'd stare at the doorway for a whole 5 to 10 minutes. It happened enough for me to get up at one point and look around the house. Milo followed me as I did. He stayed right by my side, focused, like he was also searching for something. I never found or saw anything, but it definitely gave me an off feeling. I think I finished working around 5 or 6. Being fall, we had about an hour before it got dark and cold, so I hooked Milo up to his leash and took him out behind the house on a walk. My sister got lucky with this place, basically having a forest-preserved trail right behind it. But this time of year, all the trees along the path were already stripped of leaves, and basically just dead-looking. It actually made it feel a bit spooky, with it being later in the afternoon. It was also really quiet out there, just me and Milo walking, crunching all the dry leaves on the trail. I knew the trail was about a 20-minute loop, and we went down just about halfway, when suddenly Milo stopped. like just completely stopped in place. I looked at him, asking if he was okay and tugging on the leash, but he wouldn't budge. He wouldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on something ahead of me. I turned and looked down the trail, but I didn't see anything. I looked back down at Milo and pet him, then gently tugged the leash forward again, but he still wouldn't move, and his gaze was still fixed at something down at the end of the trail, further in the forest. So I just turned and began heading back. Milo then immediately followed. The rest of the walk to the house, he kept looking back, but never once stopped to sniff or anything. He just kept his tail down and followed next to me all the way back to the house. It made me feel really nervous, seeing him being nervous. I wasn't so sure though whether it was him I was nervous about, or about whatever he was so scared of. I ended up calling my sister and talking to her for a bit after getting back inside, asking if she might know why he was acting like this, but she had no clue. Even throughout that phone call, Milo was attached to my side. It made me feel unsettled or uneasy, like he was aware of something that I wasn't. I started walking the house again as I thought about it, and casually looked out a few of the windows, but it wasn't until I got back upstairs to the spare bedroom that I looked out that window and saw something weird. It was just for a moment, but I thought I saw someone out there. Right near the house, someone walking from left to right, disappearing past the edge of the window before I could get a good look. It was almost like when you see something in the corner of your eye, and you think you know what you saw, but when you look, you realize it was nothing. So I couldn't say whether what I saw was real, or just my mind playing tricks because I was so unsettled. I stayed up in that room, sitting at the desk and trying to take it easy for the rest of the night. I watched some videos on my laptop and kept an eye on Milo. He stayed quiet, laying near me and seeming exhausted from the day. For the next 2 or so hours we were up there, nothing much happened. Milo was passed out, and I was just watching YouTube and trying to relax. Even with all the strangeness going on, I was able to sort of separate my mind from it. Not that I totally forgot about it all, but I guess I thought it just wasn't anything serious. Once it was late, I started getting ready for bed and brought Milo downstairs to let him outside one more time. I opened the back door and flicked on the lights. Milo was hesitant, but still went out. As he did his business, I looked around. The woods around the house were quiet and eerie. I watched Milo walk toward the trees, then stop and turn. Not to face me, but he was staring at something at the side of the house. I peered around the doorway and looked. Within seconds, all I saw was a man charging toward me. I jumped back and Milo started sprinting at him. The guy looked horrified for a second, stopping dead in his tracks and trying to dodge the dog. I thought Milo was actually about to attack the guy for a moment, but at the last second he backed off and started barking and growling while listening to my voice and running back inside. I closed the door and locked it, and before I could see anything else, the guy was gone. Just like that, in a matter of seconds, everything was quiet again. I quickly called 911. To be fully honest though, the cops were no help at all. They shined their lights around, but that was about it. However, as we were talking about what had happened, I was playing around with the door and happened to find that the lock on the back door actually didn't work. The lever would click and everything, but it would still open. My sister was sure it was never like that before. That night, I took Milo to a hotel, and we spent the next day there. Based on Milo's behavior, I think the guy was probably watching us all day, and even following us out in the woods on our walk. But also, there's a chance he had been inside the home before, maybe even during the day while I was working. I keep thinking back to how Milo was constantly looking at the doorway, And the lock on the back door not working seems to be a really big coincidence. But Milo definitely startled him, enough to get us both inside safely and scare him away. I'm actually quite surprised though, because my sister hasn't had anything weird happen, or any encounters since then. It almost makes me think that the man wasn't there for her. Maybe he'd been watching me for longer than I knew, and found out I'd be alone at a house in the woods, rather than safely up in my apartment building with other people around. And so he thought it'd be his best chance to do whatever he was trying to do. Probably something horrible. Can't say for sure, but I've been on edge ever since. I used to live in an unnoteworthy, simple neighborhood right in the center of a regular old town. Most of the families living around there had been there for years, if not decades. I was in the same boat, having grown up there, and had the house handed down from my parents when they moved away. This was in my 3rd year living in that house. At some point during the fall, a new neighbor moved into one of the houses across the street from mine. I wasn't the type to go introduce myself or anything like that, but I saw him moving his stuff out of a U-Haul, and he looked like any other ordinary guy. A week after he moved in went by with nothing else to note, until one night I got home from work and saw the guy standing outside my home. I recognized him right away, seeing it was the new neighbor, but he didn't seem to be walking by or walking up to my house. Just standing on the sidewalk, looking at it. I pulled into the garage and got out to go say hi and see what was going on, but in the 20 seconds it took me to get out, he was already gone. He must have hurried away. I found it really unusual, but didn't think too much about it. I had tomorrow off as well, so if he was just stopping by to say hello or ask me something, I'd at least be home to answer the door. I went about my night, and kind of surprisingly, I forgot about the guy really quickly. He didn't even cross my mind again until morning. While I was outside grabbing the mail, I just happened to look across the street at his house for a second. Didn't look like anything was going on, no lights on or anything. Though just before I looked away, I caught a glimpse of something move in the upstairs window. I did a double take, but all that was left were the blinds, shifting back and forth, like he'd just been standing there, maybe watching me. I got a little unsettled, but I got my mail and went back inside. Could have been a coincidence, or him just scoping out the new neighborhood. I tried to not worry myself. I spent the day doing chores I'd been putting off, then just chilling. Watching Netflix, YouTube, all the regular stuff. I did occasionally peek out the windows, just to see if he was out there. Sort of a gut feeling I kept having, that I was being watched. Every time I looked though, I didn't see anything. Once the sun set, I thought surely I was good for the night, but I did one more look out the window, and that's when I saw him again. He was standing at the end of my driveway. I don't know what it was about the way he was standing, but for some reason I was sure he'd just come from the top of my driveway, like he was close up to my house just a moment ago. I went to the front door and opened it, walking out toward him. I wasn't trying to come off as angry. If anything, I think I was being too friendly. I just wanted to ask him what was up and make sure everything was cool. But as soon as he saw me, he started walking down the sidewalk, pretending like he was just going for a stroll around the neighborhood. I called out a couple times, only to be ignored. So once I got halfway down the driveway and realized he wasn't going to turn around, I just gave up and went back inside. Now I was really sketched out. I thought I had to be missing something. New neighbor guy, constantly looking at my house and even caught staring at me from his window. It was all so creepy and happening for seemingly no reason at all. I stayed up for another couple hours. I saw nothing else, but I still didn't feel great when I went to bed. Took a while to fall asleep, still with that aching gut feeling that I was being watched. I don't know how, but I did manage to pass out at some point. Although I woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. My whole body sat up quickly, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable, like something was going on. Yet, the whole house was silent. I was so awake though, eyes wide open and heart beating rapidly. I turned the lamp on next to me and looked around. Everything seemed okay. The room was quiet, and it honestly looked like nothing was happening. But that sinking gut feeling that I was being watched still remained, still pressuring me to not write this off as nothing. I got out of bed and went up to the door. I reached out to open it, but in the act of unlocking it, I had this feeling that what I was doing was wrong, that maybe I shouldn't just unlock it and look around. So I left it locked and instead put my ear up to the door. After a moment, I could hear soft creaks in the hallway. Wasn't sure if it was the house or something else, so I knelt down and looked under the door. The lights weren't on out there, but I saw nothing on the other side of the door. I stayed knelt down for a few seconds, and then something suddenly moved past it. I jumped back, trying not to make a sound. The creaking instantly stopped. He heard me. After a moment of hesitation, several loud footsteps moved along the floor and right up to the other side of the room. I was still in shock, trying to be as quiet as possible, sitting up against the front of my bed. I could see the shadow of his boots under the door. They started shifting around, and then suddenly I couldn't see anything. The whole bottom of the door was covered up by something. I leaned a bit closer. It took a second to make out what it was, but just barely. I saw an eye looking back at me. He was looking under the door. I jumped up, ran around, and got my phone. My hands were shaking so badly, it was difficult to even dial 911. I could hear him moving around outside the room too, thumping on the floor. It seemed that by the time the police were on the way, and I was done with the phone call, he was gone. The whole house was quiet again. I didn't risk checking around though, just in case he was hiding. When cops arrived, they found the house to be empty. I immediately told them my suspicions of the neighbor across the street from me. They went over and talked to him. It was clear he'd been awake for a while when he answered the door, despite it being 2 a.m. Apparently, one thing came to another, and the guy blew his cover, accidentally admitting to something he shouldn't have known. They took him in and were able to get the full story out of him, confirming he was the one that broke into my home that night. And he'd been watching me for a lot longer than I was aware of. It wasn't clear how he even found me, or even why me in general, as we had never even met before. Cops found his search history, having my name in it, several times over the course of the last month, even prior to him moving to the neighborhood. There's a chance he even made the move, specifically to be right across from me. He had some other similar, weird stalking cases in the past, so they didn't let him off easy. Shouldn't have to worry about him for a long time, but I still haven't gone a day without thinking about it. It really sucks not having all the answers that I want. He must have broken into my home that night for a reason other than to just stalk me. I think he had some horrible intentions, and I was lucky my gut feeling kept me from opening my door. A few years ago, I moved to a new city, the outskirts of the city, to be more specific. It felt a lot more like a small town, with houses more spread out and things being really quiet and calm. The house I bought was small but nice. I knew nobody before moving there, and I wasn't exactly a social butterfly, so I just kept to myself most of the time. A few days after moving in, though, a knock came at the front door. I was in the middle of unpacking still, so I got up and answered it. The man was a tall, older guy with black hair and a patchy medium beard. He introduced himself as Todd, a neighbor from a few doors down. He wanted to say hi and welcome me to the neighborhood. I appreciated the gesture, reciprocating the friendliness and continuing the small talk for a few minutes. He asked some basic questions just to get to know me. All the usual ones, like why I moved, where I moved from, and if I moved with anyone. In the context of being a new neighbor, these didn't seem like off-putting questions at all. He mentioned he lived with his wife, Sarah, and enjoyed the peace and quiet of the neighborhood. After our short talk, he left me to finish moving in. Todd seemed like a nice guy, just trying to be a decent neighbor. He was at least 20 or 30 years older than me, so I knew we wouldn't become good friends or anything, but it was nice to know someone friendly was around. The next few days, I settled in, taking walks around the neighborhood and just getting used to the new area. Oddly, it was hard not to notice that nobody was ever outside. Every time I looked around, or walked around, I never saw any neighbors on their porches or in their yards. The whole town felt hollow, empty in a way that made me feel out of place. Honestly, it was kinda depressing. But around 4 one afternoon, Todd came by again. He wanted to let me know that he and his wife were having a get-together with a bunch of the other neighbors for dinner that night at 7:30 at his place. He said it'd be a great opportunity for me to get to meet all the other nice people around here. I definitely wasn't expecting this invitation from everything I'd seen, or I guess from what I hadn't seen. I figured everyone just kept to themselves, like I usually did, but it seemed like this might be one of my only chances to get to meet people, so I accepted the offer. He said he looked forward to seeing me there, then left. I was excited, but mostly nervous about meeting a bunch of people. I knew it'd be good for me though. Come 7:30, I got ready and started walking over to his place. The whole neighborhood was dark and silent. Peaceful, but also a little strange feeling. Again, giving that hollow sense, like I was somehow all alone. As I got up to Todd's place, it looked the same. Inactive, and no cars or anything near his home. I headed up to the door. It was already cracked open, but I still knocked on it anyway. Todd immediately yelled from inside for me to come on in and make myself at home. His voice echoed through the halls, and it was real quiet in there. No other voices, or even sounds of movement. Not what I expected from a whole neighborhood get-together. I took a few steps in. His home had very moody lighting, making it dark and shadowy in all the rooms. I headed down to the kitchen where I heard Todd's voice come from, but when I got there, it was empty. He wasn't there. I called out his name, and then I called out his wife's name, and got no response from either. And then I noticed there was nothing even in the kitchen. No food on the table, and no signs of any sort of get-together. And the realization set in that nobody else was here. Then, all of a sudden, I heard the front door slam shut. It startled me, and I quickly called out Todd's name again, only to still be met by the disturbing silence of his home. I walked back to the end of the hallway, confirming the front door was now shut. I felt the sense of imminent danger, of fear creeping into me that, up until that point in my life, I'd never felt before. I started hurrying up to the front door, and as I did, I heard a couple steps from somewhere in one of the rooms behind me. I didn't waste any time turning to look. I got up to the door. It was locked in 3 different places, which told me this definitely wasn't some sort of accident. As I undid all the locks, Todd called my name out and asked where I was going. I could hear him quickly approaching behind me, his voice getting deeper and less friendly with every word he spoke. I got the door open and sprinted back home. I debated calling the police, but ultimately decided I would and let the officers figure out whether or not he had intentions. I'm glad I did, because a couple minutes after making it home, Todd showed up, banging on my door and peering into my windows from outside. He left before the officers made it though, but things only got even weirder from here. In the questioning from the cops, it turned out Todd had never planned any get-together with other neighbors, and didn't even have a wife or live with anyone named Sarah. He lived there alone for over a decade. Basically, everything he told me was a lie. Just some fabricated story to get me to feel comfortable going over to his house. But unfortunately, nothing could be done about it, because there was no way to prove he was trying to do anything bad. Everyone, including the cops, knew it was all way too odd for him to be completely innocent. But it didn't matter. There was nothing they could do. I moved away from there as soon as possible. Every so often, I'll check up on that guy, looking up his name and hoping he'd been arrested or something, because I know if he isn't, he's just gonna find another victim to lure into his home. What he plans to do, or plan to do to me, I hope he can never follow through on. In my late 20s, I moved a few towns over for work. The experience went fairly smooth, I thought. I settled in at my new job really well, and I managed to find a decent apartment quickly and move what little I had into it. The building was small, just 6 units and only 2 per floor, so essentially there was just a flight of stairs going up to each story, where there were 2 doors across from each other for the 2 rooms on each floor. I was on the top story, and the woman who lived across from me was the one who gave me the tour. I think she owned a couple units in the building. The woman was older than me, I think around 45, and she wasn't friendly or unfriendly. She was very non-expressive, sort of monotone, and didn't seem to care about her appearance either. She had long, shaggy hair and a tired, mute look over her face every time I saw her. The apartment room was nice enough for me to not care though. Honestly, I thought I'd never really see her anyway. But I couldn't have been more wrong. On my first full day of work after the move, I came home late at 8 p.m., heading up the stairs and found the woman standing outside the door to my room. I was so tired from the long day, and also not expecting to see her, that I couldn't form a sentence. I definitely made things a bit awkward, as she looked at me with that dead stare she always had, and then she asked if this was when I usually got home from work. I thought that was an odd question, but I just said I wasn't too sure because I'd just started the job recently. Without even acknowledging my answer, she turned, opened her door, walked into her room, and slammed the door shut behind her. I didn't know if she was meaning to have that much attitude, or if she was mad at me for some reason, but I just headed inside my unit. I was too tired to give it much thought, and didn't even make dinner before falling asleep. I must have slept pretty good, because I was passed out until 6 a.m. when I was woken abruptly by a loud knock at the door. I jumped out of bed, completely dazed and startled by it. The knocks kept coming, so I had no choice but to walk over and open the door. The woman was standing there, looking the same as always, almost like a walking corpse. "Can I help you?" I said groggily, still trying to wake up. She made this really strange smile, surely fake, and asked a really weird question. She wanted me to come over to her place after work tonight. There was still no emotion in her voice, which gave it a really unsettling feeling. Something wasn't right about this. I didn't know exactly what she meant by coming over after work, like dinner or what, but I tried to be nice and said I was just going to be busy. Without any further response, she again turned around and went back into her room, slamming the door shut. It being 6 a.m. already, I figured I'd just stay up and get ready for work. I left the apartment at 8 and got home at 7. Thankfully, the woman wasn't outside my door, so this time I was able to get into my unit and rest without any weird conversations. I really wasn't sure what was up with her. I didn't feel worried, more just weirded out by her behavior. Anyway, I made dinner and got in bed at 10. I had my alarm set for 6:45, but was again woken abruptly to pounding at the front door. I got up, already sure who it was. I opened the door, and standing right there was the same woman with the same dull face. And even more strange, the conversation went nearly the exact same as it did the previous morning. She asked the same thing, for me to come over to her place after work, and I made the same excuse. She went back into her apartment and slammed the door, and I was left just confused and uneasy about the whole thing. Her lack of emotions made it impossible to decipher what she was really meaning by doing all this. I stayed up, having a small breakfast and then heading to work. The day was long once again, staying in the office until at least 8, but probably closer to 8:30. I didn't make it back to the apartment until 9:15. The whole lot was empty and quiet. Nobody outside, and all the lights in the building were off, as most people were probably getting in bed by then. I hoped this meant the woman wouldn't bother me tonight, and I could just slip in unnoticed. I parked and got inside, going up the stairs and trying not to be too loud. When I got up to my room, she wasn't there. I sighed in relief and put my key in the door, but something was off. It was already unlocked. I froze for a second, the realization hitting me. She had to be the only other person that could unlock it. But still, in the moment though, I couldn't fully believe it. I mean, the lady was creepy and all, but surely not that creepy. There was no way this was as bad as I was thinking. I opened the door, and I noticed something felt weird about the doorknob as well, but I didn't pay attention, as I had a more pressing situation I was focused on. The door closed behind me as I took a few steps into my apartment. The lights were all off, just like I left them, but my bedroom door was open. I could hear my heart beating as I walked up and looked into my room. The woman was standing next to my bed, her face mostly covered by shadows, but I could still see the dull, emotionless expression she had. I started to mutter, "What are you doing?" But I stumbled over my words when I glanced down at the kitchen knife in her hand. After the moment of shock, I ran for the door. I grabbed the handle and tried to swing it open, but almost lost my footing as I wasn't expecting it to not budge. It was stuck in the doorway. The knob wouldn't even move. I immediately knew the woman had rigged the door so it'd lock me inside with her. In that moment, I suddenly felt adrenaline fill me, and rather than being scared, I was pissed off at whatever this psycho lady was doing. She came at me, still holding the knife, but I don't think she was expecting a fight, because I was very easily able to catch her off guard and get the knife away from her. I held her down and called the police, keeping her under control until they got there. It was only after they got her in handcuffs that I noticed she'd actually gotten a quick slash on the back of my arm. Nothing too bad, but once the adrenaline was gone, it wasn't exactly painless. Anyway, she apparently had some serious disorders and wasn't taking the proper medication for the last several months, leading to her having an episode. That was the excuse I got from her family, But it didn't really change anything. In the end, though, everything worked out okay. I was able to handle myself and didn't have any lasting impacts from the whole ordeal. It definitely could have been 1,000 times worse, though. I'm 26 and live in a townhome in the far suburbs of a small city. I work closing shifts, usually getting out at 10 or 11 p.m., and spend most of my time at home staying up late and gaming all night with my buddies. It was sort of the same thing over and over every day. But a couple months ago, I was having a pretty stressful week at work, and wasn't in the mood to really hang out with my buddies that night, or even hop online with them. But I also couldn't sleep. I stayed up until 2 a.m. being bored and watching YouTube, before deciding to take a break and go for a walk. I didn't go for many walks, although every time I did, I always found it to be calming and enjoyable, so I don't know why I didn't go more often. Especially at night when nobody else was out. It felt like I had the whole town to myself, which in this context sounds a bit eerie, but I liked it. Or at least I used to. I grabbed a hoodie and locked up my place, then started walking. I had no plans of how long or far I'd go, but I started out by going the way I typically went, which left the townhomes area and went into the neighborhood with regular houses. None of us living out here had it great though, so all the houses were older and not so special, and mostly crowded together. Still better than walking around the townhomes though. As I walked, it felt like the whole town was asleep. Every house was dark and quiet, and there weren't any sounds at all. For the first little while, I found it very peaceful, just what I needed to de-stress. But as I continued walking down the street, I realized I hadn't ever turned. Like I'd just been walking straight the whole time, which brought me even further to the outskirts, and the street very abruptly turned into a thinner road, leading to much more spread out houses in a very wooded area. Since none of their houses had lights on, except for the occasional porch light, I couldn't even really see them, as they were so well hidden in the trees, past the dim lights above the road. It was a much different vibe than where I was just walking, but I was interested enough to keep going. I got maybe half a mile in, when suddenly I heard a scream. It was a male voice, and it wasn't a scream like they were calling for help. It sounded more like a scream to get someone's attention. It was hard to say for sure though, and with no other noises, their voice echoed through the whole forest, almost sounding like it was coming from all directions. I stopped after hearing it, and didn't see anything. After 30 seconds of waiting, I continued walking. Didn't know what that was, but I knew I'd never be able to figure it out, so I just didn't bother even trying to. Even aside from the scream I heard, the street I was walking down gave me a slightly uneasy feeling the further I went down it. The streetlights felt like they got dimmer and further apart, and the houses that I could see looked a lot older and more deteriorated. They looked neglected and honestly not even lived in. Even the road was getting more disheveled, like no one ever used it anymore. I knew this side of town wasn't in the best shape financially. I mean, even I was broke, like everyone else, but I didn't know this section existed. The more I looked at all of it, the more I started to think it really was a fully abandoned neighborhood, which made me really uncomfortable walking around there in the middle of the night. And then I heard that scream again. It was almost the same as the last one, but it sounded closer, and I was almost sure it was from behind me. I stopped and turned around. The streetlights barely lighting up the road I just came from, and the lack of any other sounds, made me really unsettled. Every little movement in the dark would make me think it was someone out there. I knew in the moment I was getting paranoid, and I should just leave. I didn't know how far the road continued, or where it led to, or if it even looped back to my neighborhood, so I knew it would be best just to go back the way I came from. The only problem was whatever the screaming was that I kept hearing. Still, I turned back. My eyes stayed locked on the road as I walked quickly, trying to get out of the wooded area as fast as possible. I made it a couple minutes down before I suddenly heard the scream again, but it was behind me, just where I came from. Whoever it was, I must have walked past them, which means they must have been hiding in the woods. When I turned and looked, I saw a man on the road. He was wearing all black or dark clothes and was walking toward me. I only looked for a second before turning and continuing to hurry down the road. Something about all this wasn't adding up, and if I just stood there and looked at him for too long, I had a feeling something really bad could end up happening. I turned to look several times after that, and despite seeing him walking toward me before, every other time I looked, he wasn't there. Begged the question of where the hell did he go? Maybe he saw me and turned around himself, not wanting to look like he was following me. I thought it'd make sense considering the sort of creepy area we were in. Whatever was going on, I didn't care to stay and find out. I moved quickly, finally making it out of that strange area and back to where all the homes were. It wasn't all that comforting, though, still feeling the eerie sense of being alone. Or maybe it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. I eventually made it back to my townhouse. I don't know if that walk was the stress reliever I was hoping for, but I was just glad to be away from that creepy area, and whoever was screaming out there. I went to the kitchen and got some water and a snack, then sat at the table for a minute to catch my breath. And that's when I heard a shuffling sound outside the front door, and then a sudden heavy knock. I instantly got up from the table and as quietly as possible walked up to the front door. I first put my ear against it to listen, then I looked out. I didn't have my porch light on, so it was basically pitch black, and all I could see was a dark figure standing there. After a few seconds, I thought I could make out that they were for sure wearing dark clothing, and so I was nearly positive it was the same guy I saw for a moment during my walk. He'd followed me home. I got my phone out and backed away as I called 911, trying not to speak too loud. Honestly, I wanted the guy to stay out there long enough for the cops to make it, and that way hopefully I'd get some answers. Because now I was really starting to question the screams that I'd been hearing out in the woods. The man outside the door knocked 5 or 6 times while I was on the phone before it went quiet, and eventually I went back to the door and looked, and he was gone. When the officers showed up, they asked questions and stuff, but nothing came of it. I mentioned the screams, and although they thought it was strange, they didn't dig any deeper into it. I don't think I slept at all that night, and while that was mostly the end of everything eventful, over the course of the next month, I kept waking up to knocks at the front door. Loud, disturbing knocks. But by the time I could get down there and look, nobody was ever there. It's been a while since his last visit, but I still feel a bit paranoid. I don't know what was going on in that wooded area, who was screaming, or what the man wanted. All I can say is I know in my gut that I was close to being part of something really awful that night. A A couple years ago, I was working as a Lyft driver. Uber as well, but in my town, Lyft was more popular, so that's what I stuck with. Anyway, because of the freedom of the job, I never managed to get myself to follow a schedule. At the time, I was in my mid-20s, and sometimes stayed up late hanging out with friends, or doing whatever. So it would cause me to stay up late on the days I'd choose to work, and do long shifts overnight. This night started just the same as any other. I started around 11ish, and did a couple of drop-offs before getting another pickup to do. Now, working these late shifts, I couldn't be picky at all with who or what requests I accept. I was usually one of the only drivers working that late, and there were also usually barely any people needing rides. If I were to miss out or not accept a single ride, it would cost me. So I was kind of on autopilot. Every time a request would come through, I'd instantly accept it and start heading there, and only then would I look a bit more into it, like how far they were or where I was dropping them off at. It never made any difference, because 99% of the time it was just to pick up someone from a party, a bar, or an office after working past the train hours. So when this request came in, I did the same as always, accepting it and heading en route to their pickup location. It wasn't until I'd say about 10 minutes into the drive that I realized it was taking me in a different direction than usual. Not toward the main town square, with all the stores and offices and whatever. So I checked where exactly I was going, and the location was a little unusual. Of course, I was driving, so I couldn't look too into it, but from a few quick glances at the map, it didn't really look like anything was out there. I thought it was definitely strange, but I wasn't going to cancel or anything. I arrived there 15 minutes later. I think it was about 1 or 2 a.m. by this point in my shift, and the place was just what it looked like on the map. Just a very isolated location with literally nothing. No houses, side roads, trails, or paths. I was thinking maybe the guy's car had broken down or something, but even then, I didn't see anything or anyone. I pulled off the side of the road and notified the customer, then waited a while. I never got a response or saw anyone outside, and with a bad feeling starting to build up in me, I decided to cancel it and drive away. Definitely sucked wasting my time like that, but it is what it is, just part of the job sometimes. I began driving back toward the center of town, because I knew that's where I'd most likely get more pickups from. But just 5 minutes after starting to drive back, I got another order. It was from almost the exact same place I was just at, but maybe a mile further down the road. Despite this seeming really suspicious, it actually wasn't at all to me. This happened every once in a while, where the location was just off or there was a mistake. And so after I'd decline it, the customer would reorder it right away. And usually the location would fix itself and everything would go smoothly the second time around. I didn't know why the customer didn't just reply to my messages, but whatever. I accepted it, actually glad this whole drive wasn't going to be a waste of time now, and turned around to go back. I passed the previous spot and went a mile further. Again, the whole road was empty and had nothing but sparse forested land on either side. However, this time, when I got to the new location, there was a man standing there on the side of the road. He wore regular jeans and a gray hoodie, and had a backpack or duffel bag slung on his shoulders. As I parked in front of him, I looked behind him, and saw nothing that he could have come from. No houses or anything. I wasn't sure how he could have gotten here, or what he was doing out here. He opened the door and got in. The drop-off spot he had marked on the map was only 5 minutes down the road. I hoped it was at somewhere that made more sense, but from the look of things, it was in just as barren a place as I picked him up from. As I drove, the man stayed quiet in the back seat, but he was looking at me a lot. Every time I'd glance in the mirror, his eyes were already on me. I felt an unsettling tension, And with how odd the situation already was beforehand, I started to overthink everything. Like, why were we out here, where he came from, and what he had in the duffel bag. All things I normally wouldn't care about, or even bother to think about. A few minutes later, I got to the drop-off spot that was marked on the map. It was nearly identical to the place I picked him up at. Nothing was around there at all. The silence after pulling up, both of outside and my passenger, had just started to give me a really horrible sense. And before I could say anything, the man told me to get out of the car. I looked back at him in fear to confirm what he just said, finding he already had a gun pointed right at me, and an uncanny, dead look in his eyes as he pointed at the door and repeated himself. I had no choice. I got out, and he followed, going up behind me and telling me to walk. He stayed several feet back, far enough to keep me from trying anything, and he led me off the road and into the forest. I tried to say whatever I could. I was truly terrified and fearing for my life. The man stayed quiet though, not responding, or showing any bit of remorse for what he was doing. We walked deeper and deeper in. It started to get more dense with trees, and a lot darker. Time didn't feel like it moved at a regular pace during this whole thing, but I think we walked for 10 full minutes, just going straight into the depths of this forest. But he suddenly said to stop. I stopped in place and could feel my time coming to a close. I was moments away from never being seen again, and my adrenaline flooded my body and just decided to take a chance and bolt deeper into the trees. He yelled stop again, but I just kept running. I used the darkness to my advantage, knowing that because he dragged me so deep into the woods, once I was farther away, he'd have trouble seeing me. I knew he was chasing though, because his voice followed behind me, not fading out. And then, suddenly, there was a gunshot. It rang through the whole forest, and the silence following it was deafening. That was it. He wasn't chasing me anymore. I think he must have fired it out of rage, or just to scare me, knowing I'd already escaped. From that point forward, I just walked in whatever direction. My phone, of course, was still in the car, so I was on my own. After a while, I found a small road with a few houses on it, and was able to get some guy to answer and help me. My car and everything in it was gone by the time officers were searching the area. Although I don't think this was just a simple robbery. In fact, I'm not even sure that's what he initially planned to do. Unfortunately though, they never found any traces to lead them to him. Even the account he used on the app ended up being a dead end. I worked as a driver for another few months, but during that time, I got a couple more pickup requests near that spot that all this went down at. And every time I called the police, only for them to show up and find nobody there. Eventually I realized I was so schizo and paranoid about it that I just found a different gig. It was a rainy weekend here where I live, and I was inside all day. I kinda liked it when it rained. Made me feel better about staying in and not being as productive on my days off. The rain being the excuse for not going out and getting any errands done. I think this was on a Sunday. I was very tired for some reason. Maybe didn't sleep super well last night, but regardless, it meant I stayed on the couch all day. And when it came time for dinner, I wasn't really in the mood to cook a meal for myself. I decided, after being cooped up all day, to head out for a drive and pick up something quick from a drive-thru. It was around 10 p.m. and the rain was pretty harsh. Not many people were out on the roads. I was out for 20 minutes, just getting food to go and driving right back home. As I drove back up to my house, though, I noticed it really stood out. With all the fog and rain, and with every other house on the street having their lights off, it made the single light shining from my upstairs bedroom window in my house really stand out. I thought it was odd, because I always turned off all the lights before leaving. In fact, I hadn't even been upstairs all day. But because I was tired and more focused on pulling in and being careful with the rain, I didn't look at it too much. I sort of glazed over it, not realizing truly how strange it was until I was already in the driveway and had no view of it anymore. I headed inside and turned on the downstairs lights, then dropped my food off in the living room and felt sluggish as I made my way upstairs to turn off the lights. I went up the steps to the upper hallway, and immediately my eyes opened up a bit wider and I sort of woke up. Not only was the bedroom light not on, but none of the upstairs lights were on. All the doors were open, so I could clearly see everything was off. After pausing for a second, I walked into the room and looked around. I don't even know what I was looking for. I was kind of just lost, questioning everything. I walked up to the window and looked out at the rainy weather and the dark neighborhood. Maybe my headlights had reflected onto the glass somehow, making it look like there was a light on. I was really regretting and punching myself for not having given it a better look as I was pulling in. Even just a moment of a more direct look at the window would have made me way more confident in what I actually saw, but now I had no clue. I didn't know how it could be possible that the light was actually on, and then in the 30 seconds it took for me to park and head upstairs, it turned off on its own. It had to be a reflection or something. I rubbed my eyes and just tried to get myself out of this tired headspace. I went back downstairs and sat on the couch with my food, opening it up and eating while watching my show. I have to say though, I must have completely let it go over my head, because after just 5 minutes, I wasn't even thinking about it anymore. Thought it was just a weird occurrence, and moved past it pretty quickly. I ate and kind of passed out while watching TV. I kept waking up though, like I'd doze off for a couple minutes, then wake up, and oddly, every time I woke up, it was with a really unsettling feeling. The kind where it felt like eyes were on me, like someone was watching me. Kept having to look around the room and over my shoulders. After a few times, it got so bad that I got up and turned on the lights in the room, as before it was fairly dark with just the TV lighting up the room. However, this didn't help all that much, because the next time I woke up and got that feeling and looked over my shoulders, my eyes were drawn toward the corner of the room. It was the part that led to the hallway where the stairs were, and none of the light from the living room bled into that area of the house, so it stuck out as this dark, shadowy corner. It was really creepy and had me still feeling like someone was watching me, so I got up again and turned on the hallway lights, and while I was up, I just decided to get ready for bed. I turned the TV off and cleaned up the food, then started to head upstairs. And I swear, the moment I got to the bottom of the stairwell, a light turned off. I didn't even realize it was on until it suddenly got darker, but it was unmistakably a light from the upstairs room. I felt that sinking gut feeling, but for some reason, I continued walking up. My mind was racing about how this was possible, and honestly just not believing it. I got to the top and peered into the now dark room. The eerie sounds of rain ticking against the roof and the moonlight beaming into the window made it incredibly uncomfortable. And that feeling still lingered, that someone was still watching me. I felt a chill as I took a couple steps in and shakily called out, "Hello?" I took a few more steps and then flicked the light back on. I looked back, seeing the light falling into the hallway at the top of the stairs, and knowing this was exactly what I saw, there was no mistaking it this time. Just as the whole thing came together in my head, something moved in the corner of my view. It was the bedroom closet door. It cracked open slightly, and through the gap, an eye was looking back at me. We made eye contact for a split second before they knew they'd been caught and shoved the door open and stepped out. The guy didn't attack me or run at me, though. He was walking up to me, trying to explain himself and keep me from running. His smile was disturbing and creepy, and he looked deranged and unkempt, but the way he approached was almost like he knew me somehow. Before he got too close, I ran back downstairs and straight out of the house. Thankfully, I still had my phone on me, so I called the police right away. However, as I was standing out in the rain, waiting for them to get there, I saw the man run out of the front door and disappear down the road. When police made it, they did a short investigation and found the back door broken. The handle and the lock looked completely bashed and shattered, but I just never noticed it because I never used the back door. And when I saw him in the room, he didn't look dripping wet, so he had definitely been inside my house all night while I was downstairs. I couldn't find anything missing, so why he broke in or what he was doing hiding in my room, I just don't know. The light also really throws me off because there had to be a reason he kept turning it on. Haven't felt safe since then, knowing he's still out there and is capable of randomly breaking into my home and hiding. Hopefully nothing does, but if anything else happens, I'll update you.
I lived in a little ADU attached to a 3-bedroom house in a suburban area about a mile from town. It was always quiet, but there were a few families nearby, so I'd occasionally hear the kids playing soccer on the street. The family that owned the house was just a couple with a young daughter. It was my first Halloween there, and they had gone all out decorating the place with cobwebs, skeletons, and gravestones all over the lawn. The daughter was really into Halloween. I heard her laughing and playing around with the decorations in the really impressive costume her mom had custom made. The family was going to go trick-or-treating until 8 and then spend the night with some friends after a party. And they asked me if I could stay in their house and pass out candy. They got those oversized Twinkies and Kit Kats and didn't want to lose their reputation as the best house on the block every Halloween. I agreed and hung out in their living room, watching movies on their huge flat screen and messing around on my phone. Until 7, plenty of kids came to the door. It was actually fun seeing all the costumes. The parents in that neighborhood went all out. Eventually, the crowd died down, and nearly an hour had passed since anyone had come to the door. Just as I had nearly forgotten about the trick-or-treating, someone started to ring the doorbell a dozen times in a few seconds and pound on the door. I got up to check it out, and a kid's voice came from outside, screaming for help. Almost shrieking. I ran to the door and opened it, but the porch was empty by the time I got out there. I stood there for a bit, looking around and trying to calm down, and decided to go back inside, assuming it was a prank. Stuff like that happens on Halloween, so I shouldn't have been too concerned about it. For the next hour, I wasn't able to pay much attention to the movies. I was still worked up over what had happened. Even for a prank, that kid sounded so desperate that it was hard to believe that they were acting. Later, another sound came from the door. Not knocking, but somebody's messing with the handle. I'd made sure to lock it so they weren't able to get in. I looked through the peephole and saw a middle-aged guy with dead fish eyes staring straight back at me. Call me stupid all you want, but I decided to open the door for him. I thought he might be lost or need some help. Even though he looked off, I didn't want to ignore him. I opened the door a crack and asked him what he needed. He asked me if a boy had come by. I told him that a bunch of kids had been by, but I had a feeling it had something to do with the prank from earlier. He just stood there silently for a bit. looking past me and into the house before shuffling off. I tried to let it go, but the guy seemed dangerous, so I locked up everything and went back to my ADU to get some sleep. When I walked out of the main house, I heard things being moved around near my place. I ran over and found the door to my ADU open and heard banging as someone threw my stuff around. There was an axe near the firewood, so I grabbed it and snuck up. Through the window, I saw the man from earlier tearing apart my place. He kept shouting the name Jake and saying he knew that he was hiding there. He was practically frothing at the mouth and destroying all of my dishes and furniture. I burst in and yelled at him to get out, pointing the axe at him. The man immediately sprinted off, bailing through my back door and disappearing into the woods. While I called the police, I heard a kid crying from under my bed. He crawled out and I kept him company while the police came. The freak had been after that kid since he got separated from his parents. Who knows what he wanted to do with him, but luckily I got there in time. The guy was arrested nearly a week later. I don't know many of the details, but I do know that I got lucky that night. Jake and I both. I was 13 when it happened. Halloween, the night I learned that some strangers are more than just strange. At the time, my best friend Ryan invited 2 other friends and me over for a sleepover after some trick-or-treating. His neighborhood was perfect for trick-or-treating. A quiet cul-de-sac with sidewalks lined with leaves and woods pressing up against the backyards. It just felt safe, as if small towns had a natural calming presence that cannot be explained, but palpably felt. We tore through the streets, laughing and racing from house to house in our costumes. Our plastic pumpkins sagged with candy. By the end of the night, we had already begun discussing which pieces we'd trade back at Ryan's when we arrived at the last house on the street. The house was different from others. The shutters hung crooked, and the paint peeled down from the siding. The porch light flickered weakly, barely holding on for dear life, but the bowl by the door was empty, so Ryan decided we'd knock. A pause, then the door creaked open. A tall woman leaned out. Her hair tangled, her skin sallow, and the sour smell of smoke clinging to her clothes. She smiled, showing her yellowed teeth. "You kids shouldn't be out so late," she said softly, as if we had done something wrong. We shifted nervously at the sound of her voice. Something about it wasn't right. Ryan broke the silence, asking, "Do you have any candy?" "Do you have any candy?" She looked at us one by one, then stopped as she locked eyes with me. "You look familiar," she whispered, almost quietly enough to prevent my friends from hearing. Her lips trembled like she wanted to say more, but she bit her tongue, and then she disappeared inside. We stood there, frozen. She came back, carrying a shoebox with a few melted chocolates, some loose buttons, and a grimy teddy bear keychain. "Take something," she urged us, holding it out as if we were supposed to trust her. "Keep it," she gestured. We paused. Ryan was the first to speak, vocalizing the hesitancy we all felt. "We're actually good, thanks." We shuffled down the steps, muttering about how creepy she was under our breaths. At least that was the end of it. The only thing was, it wasn't. Minutes later, when Ryan's mom pulled up to drive us home, the woman appeared again, this time belligerent. She ran into the street, her face twisted, eyes wide. She rushed to our vehicle, pounding on the car hood with both fists, screaming at us.
"They took my child! They took her!"
Ryan's mom quickly locked the doors and shouted for us to stay down. Neighbors rushed out while this was happening, dragging the woman away, insisting she was just confused and that she wasn't dangerous. But her eyes remained locked on me as she clawed against their arms. I'll never forget those eyes. We couldn't wait any longer. We had to go. Ryan's mom floored the gas, tires squeaking as we sped away. Back at Ryan's, we tried to laugh it off. Crazy woman, right? We began trading candy before putting on a scary movie. The more we joked, the easier it was for me to believe it had just been a weird run-in and nothing more. The house was quiet by midnight, and Ryan's parents were asleep upstairs, so the four of us lay in our sleeping bags on the floor of his room. It was around 1 a.m. when the hallway light clicked on. It was glowing under the bedroom door. "Your parents?" I whispered just audibly enough for Ryan to hear. Ryan shook his head. His parents had gone to bed hours ago. There were no footsteps, and no door had opened after the light clicked on. Ryan cracked his door an inch. The hallway was empty, but the light burned. We were whispering about who could have turned it on when Dylan suddenly pointed. "Look." We looked through the big window that gave us a view of the backyard. There was a figure standing in the rain. I couldn't make it out at first, but the moment I did, my heart dropped. It was her, the woman who seemed to foam at the mouth at the sight of me. She didn't move in the rain. When she realized we had spotted her, she bolted into the darkness. Oh no, not good, not good. We scrambled, locking every door and pushing a chair against the back one. We waited for her attempts to break in, but nothing happened. None of us could sleep after what we had just seen. Every creak of the house was a reminder that she might be inside. We sat up, wide-eyed and alert. By the time morning came, Ryan's mom had us sit at the kitchen table. We could hardly say a word and only played with our food. She looked pale too, with dark circles under her eyes. "I didn't want to scare you last night," she said slowly, as if she were processing what she was telling us as she said it. "But I woke up and I thought I saw somebody standing over my bed. It looked like a woman. When I blinked and rubbed my eyes, she was gone." And that's when the room fell silent. We told her nothing about the woman being outside the window. We couldn't. We were still paralyzed with fear, and we didn't want to confirm her account was real. We didn't have the heart to tell her. We barely ate our breakfast. Going into the backyard when the meal ended, the grass was soaked from the rain. That's when we saw them. Muddy footprints leading straight to the back door. Ryan's dad unlocked it, and we all leaned in to see. The prints continued inside, pressed into the tile. 1 step, 2, 3. Then they stopped in the middle of the hallway, with no smears leading away, and no trail back outside. Just 3 perfect footprints, ending. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. And then I thought, what if she's still out there? What if she still wants me?
Halloween storms always carry extra intensity, as if they somehow match the mood of that day in the year. I remember how powerful the thunder was, the windows rattling and the lights flickering. Even modern conveniences yield to nature, I guess. That night, however, had more to do with the supernatural than anything else. I still get goosebumps when I think about it. My parents were at a party the year this happened, so I decided to have 3 friends over while they were gone. Liam, Sophie, and Josh. We didn't feel like going trick-or-treating that night, so we ended up in the basement playing a dusty old board game. It's kind of funny how we found ourselves playing it despite my uncle's warnings. My uncle joked to me once, saying,
"Never touch that board, or you'll be cursed."
But there we were, disregarding his advice. I thought my uncle was just pulling my leg, so I figured we were safe to play it. We sat around a folding table, lit a few candles because the power was malfunctioning, and put the little pointer at the center of the board. The game was new to all of us. Liam was brave enough to get us started. "Is anyone there?" he spoke dramatically, as if to imply that the task of questioning the board was frightening. The pointer scraped slowly to yes. We laughed out loud, Sophie quipped playfully. "Nice try, Josh," she said. We assumed he was the one who moved the pointer. It seemed as though silly questions rolled right off our tongues. Will I fail math? Will Sophie marry a rock star? The responses from the pointer on the board made us crack up even harder. I almost forgot the storm outside by this point. The water dripping from the basement ceiling into a rusty pan below didn't even faze me. Then, something strange happened. Without anyone asking, the pointer shifted again. This time on its own, it landed on the two words. Behind you. Our laughter was cut short. How did that? Josh turned quickly when the pointer landed, expecting something or someone to be there. All he saw was the furnace looming in the shadows. I couldn't believe it. I knew I saw the pointer move to those words, but there wasn't any logical explanation for it. "Okay, which one of you?" I started. Before I could finish, though, we all heard a heavy thunk rattle through the pipes overhead. Nobody moved a muscle. We all made eye contact, and then Liam suggested, "Wind." It wasn't convincing, his voice cracking from the uncertainty in his belief. "Old house, right?" Then another noise. This time it was lighter, like a shoe scuffing the concrete. What was that? Sophie was the next to speak. "But basements don't have wind." She said it intensely, but quietly, as if to get our attention without disturbing someone in the next room. I grabbed the flashlight cautiously, its beam shaky, and surveyed the room, boxes, shelves, and the furnace. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Let's just pack it up," John suggested. "Wait," I said. I had to know. One more question. I placed my finger on the pointer, and that's when I asked the board, "Who are you?" It moved instantly, without hesitation. This can't be good. "Stay." Suddenly, the candle flames bent sideways, as if someone had breathed on them to put them out. A chilling draft cut through the room, goosebumps forming on my arms. "We're done," Sophie snapped, standing up as she tried to grab the board. But before she could, we noticed something in the corner of the room that stirred. It appeared darker, like it was just another space in the room, only this was pitch black. And then that darkness shifted, lifting, stretching, and a shape began to take form. It was taller than any of us, and its head scraped the low beams. The others didn't get a clear look at it, but I did. The outline. It had a face, pale and featureless, like chalk. I felt my chest drop. Then the flashlight flickered out. No. I should have listened to my uncle. Whatever it was alone with us in the dark. I heard a whisper. It was Liam, petrified, saying, "Run." We bolted to the stairs, heavy steps striking the concrete behind us. I knew the figure was gaining on us, but I couldn't force myself to look back. John shoved Sophie up the stairs ahead of him, and I was the last one to make it to the ground level. I slammed the basement door. At first, I was surprised by silence. Then the knob twisted. I immediately grabbed it tightly before the door could fully open, as my heart pounded like it would break free from its cage. The figure we saw yanked the door harder than any human hand should. Just when I thought the door would give away, there was silence. I didn't hesitate any longer. I signaled to Sophie to grab the phone in the kitchen. She dialed 911 frantically, informing the operator of what we had just witnessed. My friends huddled in fear as I kept a hand on the doorknob at all times. Minutes later, a police officer arrived, and as if on cue, the power miraculously came back on. We felt dread as the police officer stepped down into the basement, the place from which we had just narrowly escaped. He flicked on the light and began rummaging through the boxes and shelves, peering at the furniture. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. No one was there, at least not anymore. There were no other footprints either. The dusty floor hadn't picked up a trace of other footsteps except for our scramble to the door. The police officer concluded the premises were clear of any other presence, his tone condescending. He looked at us as if he didn't believe our account, but didn't have the audacity to call us liars. After the police officer established we were safe, we dragged out the game to the trash, recovering our wits as best as we could. We didn't say much. It wasn't long before their parents arrived to pick them up. I had to wait in that house alone. My parents were still out, and by this time, the storm had died. The candles had burned out, and the basement door was still closed. That night was hard to sleep. Whatever I saw might still be there. I didn't tell my parents yet, but I decided the next morning I would prove to myself that it was nothing. As the sunrise illuminated the valley, I looked for the game in the trash. The only problem was, it wasn't there. I couldn't find it anywhere. I looked and looked. I finally found it. Back on the table, in the basement, with the pointer in the center. How did it? Before I could answer that thought, I saw a single word spelled out on the board. I still get shivers. All it said was, "Stay."
Before my first year of college, my parents kept telling me, never go to the farmhouse. That was a title given to the old party house on a big plot of land a few miles from campus. Of course, their warning just made me want to go even more. In my first few weeks, I learned the house had been abandoned for nearly a decade. Yet, according to some of the upperclassmen, the legend persisted. It had become a rite of passage to leave a mark on the farmhouse. I had a plan in my own, a variation on the Mile High Club. It was a nasty, stupid idea, but the older students said it would cement my legacy. As luck would have it, I started talking to this one girl in late October. She was a year above me, and I'd been trying to impress her for weeks. I told her some of my friends in my grade and I were planning to explore the farmhouse on the night of Halloween, then hit up some parties after the adrenaline rush. Surprisingly, she agreed to come. She even scored us drinks. We pre-gamed, then we finally headed to the farmhouse. It was about a 15-minute drive out of town, down a shitty 2-lane road most of the way. When we reached the address, I turned onto a dirt driveway at a closed gate, but the chain locking it in place was broken. We rolled in, closing the gate behind us, then made our way through the barren field in front of the house. We went silent as the farmhouse came into view. The place was caked in graffiti and barely standing. It wasn't much bigger than a double-wide trailer home either, which made it seem more like a drug den than a party house. When I shut off my car and took away the headlights, the house disappeared altogether. Stepping out of the car, we grabbed our flashlights and made our way inside with ease. The floorboards felt like they were about to give out, but we kept going. The walls had been stripped down to the studs, the wires and plumbing gutted. Needless pipes and other garbage littered the floor, but that was it. We felt like we were alone that night, but only until we heard that noise. It groaned from across the house, the sound of pressure. Somewhere inside the room, at the end of the hall, weight had shifted. My two friends froze and looked at me. I looked at the girl I was with, trying to appear unfazed. I wanted to impress her so badly that I told everyone to stay put while I went to investigate. I crept down the hall, glancing left and right into the rooms I passed, until I reached the closed door at the end of the hall. Slowly, I pushed the door open and found more nothing. I stepped in for a closer look, stopping in the center. I could feel that I was in that room, where the craziest things happened, but the floor there was the cleanest in the entire house. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. My heart jumped out of my throat, and I turned around. Standing in front of the door was the girl. She walked toward me in the beam of my flashlight as she turned off her own, telling me my other friends had gotten scared and ran outside. They left her alone, so she came to find me. I asked her then if we were alone, and she nodded. She looked scared, so I took the light off her face and hugged her. I wanted to comfort her, but where her hands moved after hugging me back for a few seconds changed the mood entirely. I was thrilled and ready to roll. I put my hands on her in return. Then she lifted her head up, leaning in for a kiss. I closed my eyes and kissed her, feeling like I'd pulled off the impossible. Then, through my eyelids, I sensed a flash of light. I instinctively opened my eyes an instant later and saw it again. Behind the girl, floating in darkness for a split second, a camera flash. I jumped out of my skin. I lost my composure and dropped my flashlight before I grabbed the girl and started to run out of there. She asked me what I was doing, but I knew there was no time to explain. By sheer luck, I managed to find the way out, and we jumped into my car. There, I almost screamed. I could feel the presence of people behind me, in my car. But when I looked in the back seat, it was just my friends. They seemed almost as scared as I was, but I didn't ask them what happened. I just drove. Once we got back to town, it was clear that the night was shot, so I dropped everyone off and went home. In the days that followed, I tried to get the guys' end of the story. They only gave me vague answers about going off to investigate some other noise, but I could tell they were hiding something. I didn't say everything that happened to me either. I felt like I had dipped my toe into some weird, freaky shit by going into the farmhouse, and I just wanted to forget about it. However, a few days later, I received a DM on Instagram from an account with 0 followers and only 1 post. It was a picture of me in the dark master bedroom of the farmhouse. My eyes were wide open, staring red at the flash while my hands were all over that girl. Suddenly, it felt like my life was collapsing. Her face wasn't visible, but I was terrified someone would find out who she was and use it to blackmail me somehow. My worst fear was that the account would go viral. With that in mind, I simply blocked the account, told nobody about it, and lost contact with everyone involved that night, praying it would all just go away. Only now, years later, do I feel safe enough to talk about this. I have no clue who else was in that house, or who posted the photo. I still don't know what happened to my friends. I certainly don't trust that girl. All I know is I wish I'd listened to my parents when they told me not to go in that godforsaken farmhouse.
I was 16 years old when this happened. By then, I'd come to enjoy being home alone. Not to sneak friends over though. I just liked being able to make myself dinner, play whatever I wanted on the TV, and go to bed whenever I felt like it. One night, however, I wasn't truly alone. From sunset to midnight, my routine was the same. When I felt tired, I crawled into bed, then fell asleep without ever noticing anything out of the ordinary. Not until I was dreaming. At least, I thought I was in a dream when I first heard it. The sound of someone praying. It was muffled, yet a constant, uninterrupted prayer. A man's voice, raspy, and for some reason, desperate. After listening to it for who knows how long, I finally realized it wasn't a dream. The sound suddenly ripped me out of my sleep like a screeching alarm clock, leaving me with a burning question. Who the hell in this house was praying? We weren't religious. We certainly didn't practice at home. And most importantly, I was supposed to be alone. Once I was fully awake, I located the source of the sound. It was right outside my window. A chill shot through my body and lingered, every hair on my body standing on end. I slowly rose out of bed, then crept over to my window and pulled back the curtain the slightest bit. Outside in the backyard, there There was a man hunched over on his knees, clutching a Bible and praying, his face pointed to the ground. The worst part about him was the fact he was almost naked, wearing nothing but a pair of briefs. He was older, a bit fat, and his hairy white skin sagged. Honestly, I didn't know what the right move was, but I couldn't stand to let him stay there. My hands were shaking as I reached up and tapped the window, then asked him to leave as kindly as I could. He fell silent and looked up, staring with crazed, thoughtless eyes. He stared at me for an eternal moment before looking back down and returning to his prayer. Suddenly, I pounded on the window and shouted at him as loud as I could to get away from my house. I was hoping to scare him off, but it seemed to only work halfway. As he stood rather calmly, then walked around the corner where I couldn't see him anymore. Feeling quite shaken up, I threw a blanket over my shoulders and walked out to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I tried to sit with trembling hands, I had a strong suspicion that this wasn't over. The crazy praying man was probably around. I stood looking out the kitchen window, waiting for a sign of him. A few minutes later, someone walked into view. This time, it was another man, and believe it or not, he was wearing a full priest's outfit with a Bible of his own in hand. This guy looked sharp and proper compared to the other one, but the fact that he was there at all was just as plain wrong. The priest, if he really was a priest, stood just a few feet from the window and asked a simple question. "May I have a word of prayer with you at your front door, my friend?" I replied with a firm no, then I dropped the blinds right in front of his face and left the kitchen. From there I sat down on the couch, clenching my jaw in disbelief. What kind of priest shows up at someone's house in the middle of the night? Why me? Then, not even a minute later, there was a knock at the door. I already knew who it was, but it felt pointless trying to ignore him as he already knew I was there. I got up and looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the priest was at the back door, but now he had company. The nearly naked man who was praying in the backyard had joined him, and was pacing back and forth on the porch behind him. I shouted at them both to go away. The priest just cupped his hand to his ear and said he couldn't hear me. I was at my wit's end. I went to the window next to the door and opened it just a few inches. Then I bent down and screamed at them to leave. Instead of listening, the priest gave me a pitiful frown and a sob story. "Hey man, we just want to pray," he said. He gestured toward the other man and continued. "My friend here is terrible OCD. The only thing that helps him when he gets like this is to pray with a stranger. So we'd like it if we could just come in for a short prayer, then we'll leave." Of course I didn't believe him, especially when I looked over to this friend of his. The freak had stopped pacing and was staring dead at me once again, breathing so heavily I could see his chest rising and falling. I didn't know what was going through his head, except that I didn't want it in my house, so I said I was sorry, then reached to close the window. As soon as I moved, the priest lunged and shoved his hand through the gap. He grabbed the window and tried to pull it open, but I put my whole body into slamming it down. I crushed his hand twice before he finally yanked it back in pain. Then I shut the window and locked it. Finally, I looked outside and said I was calling the police. I did so right away. By the time I was on the phone with the operator and looked back outside, however, the two men were gone. When the cops arrived, they didn't find any trace of them either. They seemed perplexed by my description of the two men, but told me about a break-in that had occurred the other night. I don't think those men were out to rob me, though. I think they had something much worse in mind. Either way, I decided not to tell my parents about what happened. Looking back, that was a dumb decision. But I didn't want them to strip away my freedom to be home alone, even though I was constantly afraid those weirdos would come back. After my sister went off to college, I thought I was lucky to have the house to myself. I might have been a bit too old to still be living at home, but it would be stupid to say no to free rent and groceries. Anyways, I wasn't too big on parties, so one night I had my girlfriend over to chill for a while. Mom was out of town for a conference and had mentioned that my sister would be coming home soon, but she hadn't told me when. Because of that, I figured I would have privacy. My girlfriend left pretty early, Her roommate was having a meltdown or something and needed help. I offered to help her out, but she told me she could take care of it and left around 10. It was just me, and I was a bit buzzed from the 3 beers I had put back. I put on a movie and sank into the couch. In the process, I had another 2 beers and was starting to actually feel it. A few hours later, something scraped against the patio near the front door. I sat up a bit, too out of it to pay much attention. The doorknob jiggled, then clicked, and the door swung open. I immediately relaxed. The door was locked, so only a family member could get in. I called out, thinking it was Mom, but whoever it was didn't respond. With a grunt and more effort than I was hoping to put in, I turned to find the figure at the door. It was pretty dark, so I couldn't get a good look at them, but it was a woman, much thinner than Mom. Her hair was longer too, and she dragged something behind her. I realized it must have been my sister. Before I could say hello, she lumbered up the stairs, the bag she dragged thudding against each step. By that point, I could barely keep my eyes open, so I decided to meet my sister in the morning and crash on the couch. I didn't sleep for long. A bit past midnight, I heard banging in the kitchen, like someone was rummaging through all the cabinets and chucking whatever they didn't like to the floor. Now that I was up, I saw my phone lit up with a message. I picked it up and saw a text message from my mom. She was asking me if I could pick up my sister at the train station the next morning. I shot a text back, telling her my sister was already there. The noises continued in the kitchen. When I got a reply, it made a loud ding, and the kitchen went silent. Mom had messaged me that my sister had just updated her from a hotel 50 miles from me. I panicked, knowing that the person in the kitchen was a complete stranger. Footsteps slowly approached me, dragging on the hard wood and squeaking. I jumped off and faced the kitchen. The person rounded the corner into the living room. The only light came from the TV. Her face was lit up a ghost-like blue. She was disgustingly thin with sunken eyes and missing patches of hair. She had a container filled with forgotten leftover soup that she shoveled into her mouth with her bare hands. I sprinted to the hallway and heard her slowly trailing behind. I locked myself in the bathroom and backed against the far wall. I could see her dirty feet through the gap between the door and the floor. It was quiet for a bit. I could only hear my own breath. Then she started giggling. For nearly a minute, she giggled to herself, but her laughter turned to tears. She was pressed against the door, sobbing and banging her head against the wood. I texted Mom that there was someone dangerous in the house, then called the police. While I waited in the darkness, she started whispering nonsense through the crack in the door. Finally, I heard sirens from outside, and the woman took off down the hall. After an hour, the cops knocked on the bathroom door and told me it was okay to come out again. A few days later, I was told by the police that the woman was homeless and mentally ill after years of drug abuse. They had found her and put her in an institution. Since then, I haven't had a single good night of sleep. Now, every time I hear someone come through the front door, I grab onto one of the many weapons I've hidden around the house and clutch it to my chest, until I know for a fact there's someone I can trust. When I was 18, I still lived with my dad on a massive property completely isolated from civilization. It wasn't a full-on farm, but we had some cows, chickens, and sheep. Dad was always big on shooting. There wasn't much else to do out there, so he owned at least 10 guns. I never liked guns. I always imagined something going wrong, like a misfire or freak accident. Dad would try to get me out on the range, but I was more of an inside person, so eventually he left me alone when he went shooting. There were a few times Dad had to shoot at people or animals that snuck into our property. One time, a bear made its way through the fence and into our yard, and Dad put a bullet through its skull. I couldn't stand the sight of the carcass, but Dad still made me help clean it up. Another time, some drunk guys were trashing our field, so Dad fired a few warning shots over their heads. That got them running quickly. It was generally pretty safe out there, other than the winter night I had to fire a gun for the first time. That night, Dad was out at a bar with friends, and I was watching TV at home. I had the windows closed and the heater blasting while I cuddled up under a blanket on the couch. After a few movies, my eyes started to get heavy. But before I fell asleep, I got a notification from my phone that someone was at the door. We had one of those Ring doorbells, the ones that take a video feed of the outside. I obviously figured it was Dad. Who else would be out in the cold as late as it was? I waited a while for him to come in, but the door never opened. My phone had a video feed from the doorbell, so I took it out and checked, just in case Dad was out there and needed help for some reason. The video feed was mostly dark, and a few snowflakes covered the camera, but I could make out a figure standing in the shadows, maybe 15 feet from the door on the walkway. They were dressed way too lightly for the snow, and I couldn't make out their face at all. It didn't look like Dad. The person was too tall to be him. For a minute, the guy just stood there. Just as I was about to put my phone down, the man wandered off and out of view. By that point, I was wide awake. I prayed he was leaving and got off the couch, too terrified to make any noise. When I started to relax, there was something scratching against the window in the kitchen. Something felt really wrong, so I raced to the windows and doors near me and made sure they were all locked. The only ones left were in the kitchen, and I couldn't bring myself to go there. The scratching stopped, and I peeked into the kitchen to find the little grooves carved into the outside of the window. Then, something started to pound on the side of the house. Something started to pound on the side of the house. The paintings on the walls shook with the banging. I felt close to hyperventilating, but I was composed enough to run upstairs to find one of Dad's guns. Dad had a safe in his room with a shotgun, so I entered the password and loaded up 3 shells, hoping I was doing it right. The banging on the side of the house stopped, but then one of the upstairs windows near my room shattered. I cocked the shotgun and ran to the source. It might have been a bad decision, but the adrenaline and the weapon did the thinking for me. I pointed the barrel at the window, but there was nothing there, and I got close enough to peer out into the snow. I saw one of our chickens dead on the ground. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that same man from the camera crouching in the snow, licking his hand. Without hesitation, I pointed the gun in his direction and fired, though I missed him by a lot. After the shot, he sprinted off into the darkness, and I was alone. I called my dad, and he got home 10 minutes later. Dad didn't want to get the police involved. He never trusted cops. I moved out a few months later and never looked back. I'm still not sure who that guy was or what he wanted, but I'm glad I was able to scare him off. It freaks me out just imagining what he might have done with me. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor. Usually my roommate is home, though she sometimes stays over at one of her guy friends' places. Recently, on a night she was out, I was smoking a cigarette on her screened-in porch. There's a solid wall around the porch a little over waist height, so while I was getting down, I couldn't see the ground outside. However, this changed when I stood up to go inside. As I closed the sliding glass door, I looked back out of habit. About 50 feet away, a man was standing in the parking lot, looking directly up at my apartment, at me. Actually, I recognized him. He lived in the complex. For the most part, he was normal looking. Mid-20s, straight black hair just above his shoulders, generic outfit, but it was the way he acted. He was always wandering aimlessly, sometimes down the middle of the road, or muttering gibberish to himself. It seemed like he was aware of other people on some level, but was trying to ignore them, almost like he didn't trust they were real. Up until then, though, he seemed mostly harmless, but that went out the window when he locked his eyes onto my apartment. I closed the blinds, then sat down on the couch and went back to the TV show I was watching. Still, I had this nagging feeling. I kept trying to ignore it, but about a half an hour later, I finally peeked outside. My heart sank when I saw he was still out there, even closer than before. Starting to freak out, I called my roommate on FaceTime. When she answered, she was drunk and in bed with her guy friend. I told her what was happening, but she wasn't taking it seriously. I decided to risk it and go back onto the porch so I could flip the camera around and show her. But when I stepped out, the man was gone. My roommate said I told you so, like I was just overreacting. I didn't appreciate that, but I was relieved. I figured even a crazy person had to have gotten bored after standing in the same spot for the better part of an hour. My roommate hung up. Then I went to the kitchen to make myself some herbal tea so I could calm my nerves. The kitchen is by the front door, which is on the opposite side of the apartment from the porch. I was pouring the boiling water over the bag of tea when I heard something that almost made me jump out of my skin. The door handle was rattling. Someone was trying to get through the door. I rushed over to make triple sure it was locked. Then I looked outside and saw that same guy on the other side. He had a completely glazed look in his eye, just a hollow, empty face. But it was terrifying. Almost as soon as I saw him, it was like he could sense me, because he stopped trying the handle and looked directly through the peephole back at me. It was like he was staring into my soul. Afraid for my life, I ran back from the door and called the police. I don't know what the man did right after that, but of course, by the time the cops showed up, he was gone. As I talked with the cop, he also tried to play it off, saying the man might have been drunk and confused about which apartment was his, but eventually figured it out. I hated that there were two people telling me I was overreacting, but I had to stay calm. The cop left, saying he'd circle the complex to see if he saw anyone suspicious, though he never came back. After a little while, I called my roommate again to update her and ask if she could come home. She didn't want to, though, so I hit up a friend of mine and begged her to sleep over. Thankfully, she agreed, but until she arrived, I was posted up on the couch, wide awake, with all the blinds closed and the lights turned off. It must have been 20 minutes later when I started to hear more strange noises. I couldn't tell what was making it. It was like the sound of a squirrel crawling across the screen, but 10 times louder. Finally, I looked through the blinds covering the sliding door and saw my worst nightmare. The man was punching through the screen and crawling onto the porch. I screamed in panic. Just as he got over the wall, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a rock. I knew he was going to try and break through the glass, so I ran away out the front door and started screaming at the top of my lungs for help. I sprinted across the breezeway and raced down the steps, hoping my neighbors would look outside. But then I saw my friend's car pulling up to me. I rushed into the passenger seat and told her to drive out of the complex while I called the police again. We waited across the street until we saw cops pulling into the complex and followed them. When we returned to my apartment, it turned out the man never managed to get in. There was still a gaping hole in the porch screen and a giant crack in the sliding glass door. But he gave up before smashing it and jumped back down to ground level. Exactly how he managed to scale my downstairs neighbor's porch to get up to mine is still a feat of insanity I can't comprehend. Thankfully, one of my neighbors saw him running back into another apartment, so the cops were able to finally knock on their door and arrest him. He wasn't an official resident, but he'd been staying with a relative who lived here after being kicked out of his previous place. As the man suffered severe mental health issues that had been unchecked for years. When I pressed charges, he entered a plea deal that had him sent to a mental hospital instead of a prison. I figured that's for the best, but I still have absolutely no idea what he wanted from me. I'm just glad my friend showed up when she did, or he might have chased after me. Ever since that night, I don't just dislike being home alone. It terrifies me.
Every summer, this nagging memory comes back. It always resurfaces the week school starts to get out. I remember finishing the 5th grade, a lighthearted occasion by any means. Streamers of notebook paper in the air, kids already tasting summer freedom. I was just excited for the 3-month vacation to kick off. My mom promised to pick me up like she always did because it was our little ritual. Some kids walked home that day, while others got a ride to their friends' houses. My friend Tyler and I had plans to head back to his place, as we had been counting down the days. When my teacher let us pack our things, I didn't see Tyler walking out. Huh? Where'd he go? Students hustled to meet their parents while I waited with my teacher, Mrs. Paulson, at the side doors. The crowd stretched into the parking lot, people waving, calling names in the hubbub of excitement. The air was thick, the asphalt reflecting the heat under our sneakers, and the noise chaotic, kids screaming their goodbyes for the summer. Then I heard a voice in particular.
"Ryan!" A man waved from near the curb. I didn't recognize him. Sunglasses, faded ball cap, quick smile that seemed falsely reassuring. He walked over like he knew me, like he belonged. "Hey Ryan, I'm glad I caught you. Tyler's dad got held up at work, so I'll pick you up. I already talked with your mom over the phone about it. I'm Tyler's uncle, by the way." Mrs. Paulson looked at me to see if I knew who the man was. I wasn't sure, but the man gave Mrs. Paulson a casual wave, and Mrs. Paulson seemed too preoccupied to register my concern. She just nodded, giving her approval that I could leave, and turned back to the line, and just like that, let me go. I started to walk toward the parking lot, wondering why Tyler's uncle moved so quickly, scrambling to keep pace. He began talking non-stop about his old school days, how Tyler was waiting at the house, and soon, about nothing of importance. His voice had a jittery rhythm, words catching every so often, like his tongue could not keep up with his thoughts. It wasn't until we reached his car, a gray wagon with a dented bumper, that I realized something wasn't right. Tyler wasn't there. The man motioned for me to enter the vehicle as if sensing my hesitancy. I timidly stepped in. "Where's Tyler?" I could hardly manage to find my voice. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror once we pulled away. "Already home." His tone changed. "You'll see him in a few minutes." I pressed my palm against my knees, staring at the streets outside. We drove longer than expected. Everything was close in our town. The school, the park, our houses, but we started to pass houses I didn't know, and the streets felt unfamiliar. We arrived. His house looked normal enough, white siding, trimmed bushes, a quiet street. He gestured for me to come in after unlocking the door. The air changed the instant I entered the house. Dim, all the blinds pulled shut, a faint smell of mildew. Only a single lamp burned in the living room. "Tyler's downstairs," the man said, his voice smooth, almost as if automatic. "I'll go get him." He vanished down a side hallway. All I could hear were the hinges creaking, then footsteps descending. My chest tightened. I was alone with this man, and I don't think Tyler's here. I tested the front door, locked. I could feel my hands trembling at this point. And I saw it, the kitchen phone, a beige receiver bolted to the wall. I hesitated. What if he comes back? I started shaking, but I knew it was now or never. I dialed the number, shortly hearing a voice on the other end. I whispered, "Please, I've been taken. Send help." They started to respond, but I panicked the moment their voice carried in the room. I shoved the phone under a towel and hurried back before the man noticed. "Ryan," he called. "Come on down. Tyler's waiting." I didn't answer, and then his steps pounded up. He appeared in the doorway faster than expected, smiling, but his eyes betrayed his intentions. "You okay, Ryan?" "I want to go home now," I admitted, terrified. The smile vanished. His disposition changed, approaching me, grabbing my wrist and dragging me to the basement door. "Quiet. I'll let you go soon enough."
He spoke in a calculated tone, trying to maintain composure despite growing signs of anger. The door slammed behind me, and a draft of cold air sent a shiver down my spine. And then I misstepped the second stair. Ouch! I tumbled to the bottom. Looking up, all I saw was the vague perception of the man locking the door. Tyler was nowhere to be found. I could hear every movement above me, his pacing, his muttering. I struggled to move. He approached, holding his belt in his hands. I cried at the top of my lungs, then closed my eyes to avoid seeing what would happen next. All I could hear was the descent of his footsteps. Then, 3 sharp rings of the doorbell. I faintly heard it. Knocking. Louder. Voices calling. The man didn't move. The bell rang again.
Now, fists pounding against the door. A few seconds later, the sound of wood cracking, boots rushing inside, shouts flooding the air. The man was footsteps away from me now. He flinched for a second, assessing the situation. In a desperate attempt to escape, I bolted up the stairs, slamming against the door, screaming for help. The man would grab me any second now, but then the lock turned. A police officer pulled me out into the light. You could say just like that, it was over. Red and blue lights spilled across the quiet street. Neighbors stared from the porches. They dragged the man out in handcuffs, his head low, his face pale in the flashing sirens. My parents arrived, my mom breaking down as she held me. I didn't really have much to say. 17 summers later, I still wonder if he's out there, watching, waiting for another last day of school. Towards the end of my junior year in high school, I started to get really into graffiti. By the end of the school year, my friends and I had already tagged up all the major spots in the area. At first, we were sticking to underpasses and road signs, but one of the guys knew of a spot that had hardly been touched that looked like a lot of fun. It was the last day of school, and 4 of us planned to hit that spot once it got dark. During the day, I could hardly sit through those last classes. The moment the bell rang, I ran off to get all my stuff together. The spot was an old church with a preschool attached to it. It hadn't been in use for a decade, and it was set to finally be demolished. We figured it wouldn't be any harm to fuck around in there, given that the whole place wouldn't be around in a few months. I packed a backpack full of spray paint, a flashlight, and some other assorted things that I might need. Once it was nearly midnight, my friend Jake pulled up with the others in his Prius, blasting music. I threw my stuff in his trunk and got in the back. We were all riding high in that car. With summer ahead and the chance to tag a new place, I can't deny that it was a rush breaking into a church. We pulled up in the empty lot and walked up to the fence blocking off the rest of the property. Nate, another one of the guys, started to climb it, but hopped back down when he noticed the barbed wire at the top. Jake pulled a bolt cutter out of his pack, one he must have stolen from his dad, and cut through the lock. The gate creaked open, revealing the church completely destroyed by the weather. Parts of the building were smashed by falling trees, probably some of the storms a few years back. Zach, the last of us to go through the fence, was a bit worried about going inside when it looked like the entire thing could cave in at any moment, but Jake was sure it was safe. As we walked to the main entrance, it started to rain. We ran for cover under the awning and tried to pull the door open. It wasn't chained shut, but it was still stuck. The 4 of us took turns trying to kick it in until I finally managed to bust it open. When we crossed into the church, I immediately felt like I was choking on dust. I shone my flashlight ahead and found the halls surprisingly clean. There was no furniture or spilled papers. The whole area had a surreal kind of stillness. Nate was already getting cold feet. Jake had to drag him inside to get us all moving along. Other than our footsteps, I could hear little paws scuttling around in the dark and squeaking that was almost like laughter. We tried every door along the hallway, but they were all locked. Jake wanted to make his mural in the main area, so we wandered the empty halls until we found the double doors to the chapel. Before we pushed them open, I heard something that froze me mid-step. Deep whispers came from behind the doors. Jake, being an idiot, had to check it out, so he cracked the door open to let us peek in. In the pews, near the front, something human-shaped kneeled over, muttering to itself. It sounded like a long, pained chant. I could barely make them out with nothing but the moonlight from the crack in the ceiling. Nate took a shaky step back, but bumped into the door. The figure stopped its chanting and slowly climbed to its feet. I immediately shut the doors. Our group was ready to run for the entrance, but when we turned around, every door in the hall that we'd found locked was open with heads peering out of the cracks. I couldn't make out any of the faces. While we were all paralyzed, Jake pointed his flashlight in their direction, but every head ducked back into the rooms before the light could touch them. The only way out was the way we came, so the 4 of us sprinted back down the hall towards the exit. As we passed those doors, they all opened behind us, one by one. I couldn't be sure if we were being chased, but I wasn't ready to risk it either way. It was pouring rain outside, and Nate and Zach slipped in the mud. I grabbed Nate, and Jake grabbed Zach. As I picked Nate up, I glanced back at the church and saw 5 figures standing under the awning like shadows. We all piled into the car and drove away. The building was demolished later that year, and I never heard anything about people living there. I'm not sure if we just ran into some junkies or crazy homeless people, but I couldn't make myself sneak into anywhere else after that night.
I worked at a fast food restaurant through college so I can make ends meet. I was paying my own tuition, so I had to balance school with a full-time job. One thing that made it easier was that my coworkers were pretty helpful. Especially this guy named Daniel. Daniel was a little bit older than I was. He never went to college, so he was an assistant manager at the restaurant. I was pretty clumsy and not that good with my hands, so Daniel ended up picking up a lot of slack for me. He seemed like a decent enough guy. We weren't close, but there was a bit of small talk. The thing is, I didn't like being too close to him. It wasn't his looks, even though those didn't help. He was tall, probably 6'3", likely at least 260 pounds. It wasn't an athletic build. Most of his weight had to be fat. He had a buzz cut and patchy facial hair that didn't do him any favors. But the real problem was that he always smelled sour. Anyway, he was gross, but I did owe him for how much he had helped me starting out. Summer break was coming up, and I had no plans for the first week. Some of my friends were planning a trip to Palm Springs to throw a huge party, but I wasn't feeling up to it. Day 1 of the break, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Daniel, which was weird, seeing as I'd never given him my number. And he was asking if I wanted to hang out. I asked him where he got my number, completely ignoring his invite, and he said he got it from the employee roster. I texted another coworker telling her about it, and she told me it was better to ignore him. Apparently, he tried to hit on a few of the girls working there and would eventually back off if I shut him down gently. I was already creeped out, so I told him I was going on a trip with my friends and that I didn't know when I'd be back. After that, I muted the conversation and forgot about it. I thought about blocking him, but I figured I might need his contact for work-related stuff. The next day, I was in the living room at night watching movies when I saw a car's headlights outside my house. They were really bright LEDs, so I went to close the window as to block them out. When I got to the window, I saw someone step out of the car onto the sidewalk. They were huge, tall, and heavy. I could immediately tell it was Daniel. I nearly dropped the remote in shock. As he approached the house, I pulled shut all of the curtains and locked the windows and doors. He must have thought nobody was home, as I didn't have a car and I lived alone. In the darkness, I watched through a crack in the curtains as he snuck up to my bedroom window and tried to slide it open. Luckily, it was locked. And after he messed with it for a while, he left. After he drove off, I turned the lights back on and rested against a wall while my heart beat out of my chest. I thought about calling the cops, but I wanted proof that he'd been there to make sure I could actually get a restraining order on him. So I decided I would get him in the act if he came back. I checked back on the conversation with Daniel that I'd muted to find dozens of new messages. At first, they were just asking why I wasn't responding, but eventually, there was a picture that was taken that night after I'd already gone to sleep. It showed me in bed between a tiny crack in the curtains. I got actual chills just thinking about how close he'd gotten to me and what he might have done. Even though I'd been on the lookout, he told me that he knew I was hiding all along. He must have been waiting until I went to sleep and came back. Daniel told me that if I didn't respond within an hour, he'd be back, and he wouldn't stop taking pictures. Over an hour had passed since he sent that text, so I called the cops right then. A few minutes later, before the cops got there, Daniel's car pulled up in my driveway, and he marched up to my door. I filmed him through the window, and he spotted me. Daniel banged on the window and begged me to let him in. He told me that what I was doing was unfair, and that I was a shallow bitch for ghosting him. I shouted at him to leave, but that only made him angrier. Daniel started to hit the window, but before he could break it, the cops finally pulled up. Daniel was only taken in for one night, but I did manage to get a restraining order. Still, I didn't feel super safe. Daniel never showed up for work again. I assumed he just left town completely, knowing I'd already told everyone what happened. After that, I got a lot more suspicious of guys when they tried to act too nice or helpful, which made it hard to get through work and school. Some part of me hopes that Daniel ends up alone forever and never tries that kind of shit again. But another part of me hopes he does, so he can end up in prison forever.